Hello, everyone. As you all drip in, thank you so much for joining us today live. We always appreciate people who join our events live. So very excited to have some faces smiling back at us. And thank you for joining the campaign. I hope you enjoy. Oh, I'm loving the little baby. What a cute little baby you have there. Okay, so for anyone that is new to Dyslexia in Adults World, we live on the policy that 5 minutes late is on time. So if you ever join any of the rest of our events throughout the next month, then the chances are we'll be letting you in at 2, 3, 4 minutes past. If it's on the hour, then honestly something's going wrong. Like you should be concerned. It's like a red flag for us that to be on time. So people drip in and we kind of try and join a couple of minutes late to give everyone time, including myself, who, has the capacity to be late from time to time. So the idea of what if dyslexia is easy, just to kind of kick everyone off for the month. Thank you again so much for joining. We are just blown away by the response, is to really challenge people on the assumption that dyslexia has to be this massive challenge, this massive frustration. Hopefully the name gave you enough of a like, oh, really? Could it be easy? Are you sure? To really challenge you and to help you think about, could it be easy? How would it be easy? What would it look like if it was easy? And the idea is that over the next month, we're going to give you as many resources and advice as we think you can cram into 1 month. There's a lot to help you really answer the question, how would I make dyslexia easy? So we have 5 weeks, and this is our kickoff week, and we are kicking off with understanding neurodiversity. And the reason why I decided to kick off in this direction is we wanted to really help people be able to be as proactive as possible when it comes to managing neurodiversity. Something that's really important to me, to be able to kind of go into a situation and think, oh, I'm going to have this problem. Oh, I'm going to feel like this. Oh, this could be a problem. Oh, this is going to be a situation. And then instead of that gut-wrenching moment where you're like, oh my God, it's going wrong and I'm in trouble and I don't know what to do. If you have a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more awareness, a little bit more understanding, then you have a higher chance of being able to be proactive and prepared. If you're going into a boring ass meeting, then you're going to bring a fidget toy or you're going to think about how you're going to pay attention. If you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm about to get a new piece of information and I want to be able to understand all of the things that are included, maybe you want to think about how to understand the big picture and how you're going to get that information to fill in those gaps that dyslexic people love. Or maybe you find that your communication style is just not hitting and people are not getting it. So how are you going to think about ChatGPT things that you might put in to make your emails flow easier and for you not have to overthink them? These are just a couple of the examples that I wanted to give you to help you understand why we think being proactive and knowledge and understanding on neurodiversity is super important. I really love the sound of my own voice, slightly too much, hence why I decided to have a podcast. So I'm going to do my best to not talk so much and let our amazing panelists talk. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourself, explain which neurodiversity you're represented, and then we will kick off with some questions. Casey, do you want to start for me?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name's Casey Andley. You may hear from my accent, I'm South African, so I am sitting in Cape Town. And yeah, so I am representing ADHD today. Yeah, Natalie, do you want a little bit of the history or are we going to go into that in a
give
bit?
them a little bit. Casey is part of the training that I've done. So a lot of the things that I know secretly is just because Casey knows them. So if you want to explain, that probably would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So I work for a company called Connections in Mind, a UK-based company, and we do everything executive functioning support. So my particular role is coaching or coach training. So we run 6-week courses then to train people how to be executive functioning coaches. And we've got a couple of other things that we do, one-to-one coaching. We've got a community support platform and network. But yeah, I think the coach training is just really, really exciting for me. I Yeah, and Natalie, I don't know how far you want me to go back at the moment, but yeah, that's a whole journey. I'm sure, you know, different questions and stuff will pop up. But yeah, so at the moment, I'm an educational psychologist. I've done some counseling then as well within the neurodivergent space as well. Yeah, so that's me from ADHD.
Yeah, so Casey's just a show off, really, in summary. And then we have wonderful Katie. And again, for anyone that is new here, and if you don't know Katie and you're slightly new to our world, then frankly, you're just missing out, because she writes the amazing newsletter. She also does so many things behind the scenes to make our amazing community run and be as fabulous as it is. So Katie's been working with me for 4 years now. God bless her heart, for her sins. And she has been working through the process of understanding her neurodiversity better and starting to come to the realization that she feels that she has autism. So we wanted her on the panel today because I think she really represents what many of you will be really experiencing, which is that feeling of, is it dyslexia? Is it something else? I'm kind of recognizing things on TikTok, but should I get a diagnosis? Where am I at? You know, really representing that piece of where so many adults are at, of trying to understand where they're going on and trying to put together all of the pieces. So Katie, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about your representation?
Yes. Hi, I'm Katie. I am American, obviously. So hello to anyone who's in America and skipping work right now. I was diagnosed with dyslexia as a kid. I was diagnosed with ADHD in university or college. And then as I've gotten into my mid to late 30s, I've realized that that doesn't tell the whole story of who I am, and kind of not everything fits perfectly. So in the past probably 6 months to a year, I've been learning more about autism and how it affects different people and what autism actually means. And so Natalie invited me to speak today.
Amazing. Thank you, Katie. And then we have Tumi. Do you want to give it like a small introduction to yourself and your neurodiversity?
Hi everyone. First of all, thank you, Natalie, for inviting me here. I am representing dyspraxia. I found out I was dyspraxic at the age of 4. Okay, so I didn't find out; my parents found out. And I also run a company called the Black Dyspraxic. So I talk about raise awareness of dyspraxia, but also the intersectionality of race and neurodiversity, which I'm sure we'll get onto later.
Amazing. And then, because my endeavor not to do all the talking, we have amazing Joe, who is going to be also representing dyslexia, because I know that so many of you, although you have that dyslexia diagnosis, God knows what it means beyond spelling and reading. And even though we want to educate people more who are neurotypical, we also need to educate ourselves as neurodiverse people. So Joe is going to be helping you navigate that question of what's me and what is dyslexia?
Yeah, so I am Joe. I am diagnosed dyslexic. I got a late diagnosis dyslexic. I got a diagnosis at 34, but my background is actually slightly different. My background is education. I was a primary school teacher, but I've retrained as a specialist teacher and assessor of dyslexia. And I think what's quite interesting in terms of this discussion tonight is increasingly when I do assessments for children and for adults, because I can assess children and adults, there are co-occurring difficulties, and it is unpicking which difficulty belongs to what's the symptom, what's the root cause of the symptom. And I think the other thing I'll share at this point is, a bit like Natalie, I have come to terms with my dyslexia diagnosis, but I'm also thinking I am probably ADHD as well. And I'm still in the process of weighing up whether I want to get that formally diagnosed or not, what that would actually mean, whether it would make any difference. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's so nice to hear your stories, and I'm sure so many people are resonating. So I think I know I have dyslexia. I'm frankly rubber stamped by Casey because she spends way too much time dealing with my executive dysfunctions on ADHD, and on the very long NHS waiting list for it. And then also, for sure, without a doubt, have dyspraxia, have way too much food in my hair for it to be normal. And so therefore 100% sure on dyspraxia as well, although without a diagnosis. Also, I just walk into frankly everything. It's somewhat embarrassing. And don't even get me started on my dancing skills. So I think Joe hit on a really important point, that what so many neurodiverse people don't understand is that if you have one neurodiversity, the chances that you have one more is so extremely high that it's almost the rule at this point. So it is really important to understand what is me and what is dyslexia and what is all the other baggage that's going along. Because if I didn't realize that I had ADHD, I wouldn't be able to get through my day and focus, because so many of the strategies that I'm utilizing are not just about dyslexia, but about ADHD as well. So the problem is that if you're dyslexic, you're like, oh, it's so much more than spelling and reading. But if you're looking at, you're like, oh no, I'm not ADHD, I can sit still. It's like, oh, if only you knew. Or I'm not autistic, I can look people in the eye. Or, you know, I don't really know what dyspraxia is and I want to understand it better, and all of those kind of things. So I want to just quickly go along the panel. And if you could give me one trait of one of your neurodiversities that you're like, you need to know this. If you don't realize this, then you don't fully understand your neurodiversity. So whatever you feel passionate about for like representing your specific one, then I'd love to hear. And again, do you want to, maybe should we go to the back? Do you want to start with Joe? Sorry to be, to dive you straight in there, Joe.
Put me on the spot. I was frantically thinking then. So I can't give you anything quirky because I'm thinking on the spot here. So for me, I think there's this real misconception that dyslexics can't read. And we can read, but often the issue is being able to understand what we've read. But I've recently actually just done a TikTok between the difference of spelling ability and spelling skill, because quite often if we have got a strength with visual ability, like many of us have, we can memorize lots of early spelling words to a certain point. We can overlearn them. But actually, we can then become unstuck when we start to learn something new, or when new topic vocabulary comes in, or when we change jobs, because we don't have those particular words nailed in our brain, and we haven't got the skills to be able to attack and break those words down for reading or spelling, because it's likely we've just developed a sight vocabulary and that's how we're getting by. So I think for me, when we talk about difficulties with reading, it's not just not being able to read. Sometimes it's about being able to do the mechanics of reading, but working memory and processing, making it difficult to comprehend what we've read.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think the fact that you led with, oh God, you've put me on the spot, is the best dyslexic answer you could have given. Like, that is the answer for dyslexia. Every single day, I am speaking to someone about adult dyslexia, and they are telling me, if people ask me something on the spot, I just don't know what to say. I'm just blank. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to think. And so I think that is the best answer.
But you see, I'm going to, not devil's advocate, but I also think that's a bit of an ADHD trait, because you're almost like paralyzed with, oh my goodness, I've definitely got to answer something here, and my brain is really active, bouncing from one thing to another thing to another thing. What thing should I share? So potentially,
Katie says that my dyslexic superpower is that I'm the queen of bullshit. I cannot know what the hell is going on, and my ability to bullshit is like 10 out of 10. Tumi, what's yours, and then we'll let Casey retort as and when she's ready.
Before I say, could I just add the conversation about co-occurrences and stuff?
Yeah,
I think the human brain is so complex that defining it by labels like dyslexia, ADHD, it doesn't do it justice. These are just ways of how we can potentially categorize different brains.
100 years ago, when we came up with most of these categories as well.
Exactly. But the fact is, there's like 8 billion people on the planet. We're never going to come up with names that would be able to categorize every single brain. So yes, there's autistic brain, yes, there's dyspraxic brain, dyslexic brain, but then there's one brain that you need to know about, and that's your brain and how it works. And then so I just wanted to, and so it's like having that thing where the label is important for you to understand it, but that's just the beginning of the journey.
Love that. That's really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. looking for those moments, Natalie.
So in
Um,
terms of dyspraxia, do you want to just give us a bit of an overview? Because I think the vast majority here are going to be like, what's that one?
yeah, so I'll do that, and then, but first I'll answer you. If there's a quirky thing that I think people don't really know about dyslexia, is that dyslexics struggle to control their volume.
Mm.
So too often I'm around people and people are like, why are you shouting? I am right here. And that's just because I struggle to control my volumes, my internal volume. So quick into what dyspraxia is. It's basically characterized, and I say characterized because it's a lot of other things, right? But characterized by poor coordination. So we're talking about struggling with fine and gross motor skills. And that's why Natalie said that I think I'm dyspraxic, and she talked about walking into things and her inability to dance, which I'm also unable to dance as well. And so it's those kind of things that are typically associated with dyspraxia. Another word for dyspraxia is developmental coordination disorder, which is more like the medical term because there hasn't been a medical agreement of what dyspraxia is. And I think because they're different terms, it's sometimes why there's a difficulty in that lack of awareness compared to dyslexia or autism or ADHD. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Katie.
Katie or Casey?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Katie. I know I'm gonna have to like really enunciate, aren't I?
So when it comes to autism, I think one of the things that people don't understand is that the typical picture of what an autistic person isn't the reality. Autism is very much a spectrum, and it's almost one of the ways that I've heard it described is it's almost like a spectrum of struggles. And you don't necessarily we don't all have the same struggles. So for me, one problem I have is regulation between like when I come up with a plan in my head and then anything that derails that plan, I get really dysregulated internally. And that happens all across the board. So not just in work things, but in my personal life, like today we're going to see a football match. And if for some reason we don't leave when I want us to leave, it will like internally, my nervous system will become dysregulated. So it doesn't work that way for everyone. Some autistic individuals don't struggle with, pivoting and switching tasks, but they struggle more with the more like outwardly social things like eye contact and whatnot. So that would probably be my like small thing is autism is a spectrum, and it's a spectrum of different struggles. And mine specifically, the one that I don't think most people know about is that dysregulation internally when plans shift.
So she decided to work for me, the person who constantly throws curveballs at her. And she picks them up and runs with them with such grace. KC.
Alrighty. Yeah, so I think with ADHD, I think just the name in itself, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I mean, it's such an ancient name, and it's kind of based on, what people think of like a 7-year-old boy jumping around a room and like bouncing off the walls and everything. And I think it's just our understanding, especially of ADHD in women, has changed so much. So for me, the attention deficit is not really there for me. I can pay attention, but I'm paying attention to a million different things. So my regulation of attention is what's actually difficult. I think the biggest thing for me that a lot of people don't know about ADHD is the burnout factor, because I am spiraling all the time, trying to chase a million different rabbits down a million different holes like that. My burnout is real. My energy management is paramount, and I'm still working out what gives me energy, what saps my energy, how can I become hyper-focused on some things, but then be able to pull back and look after myself. So I think, yeah, energy management is massive with ADHD.
Yeah, I think the thing that finally made me go, okay, I gotta just, this is for sure it, is the racing thoughts. Like they're just like circling and circling and circling, and they just can't drop them. And that was the thing that made me think well, it couldn't possibly be me, because I will focus on something and focus on something and focus on, and then it was when I was like, oh, I'm almost like hyper focused on that thing. And that's when I was like, oh no. And like I said, you know, you look at things through such a narrow lens, and once you understand the full range, you're like, oh, it feels uncomfortable. It's me. So kind of going back, starting with you, Casey, again, when we think a little bit about like coping mechanisms, I think you really started beautifully on that energy management. I always like to talk to people when I'm talking to them about dyslexia. It's a journey, not a destination. You don't kind of like, okay, I've got strategies now, like, cool. You know, your boss changes and then, you know, everything throws through a loop. Maybe you have kids and you have less time. You don't have that ability to work hard. There's lots of different things that are going to throw you curveballs. You're going to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to manage this now. I'm a terrible delegator. And then I decided to hire a team. And I was like, all right, then I'm going to learn to explain things. Okay, well, let's go. So could you talk a little bit about how you manage that concept of like the strategies constantly changing, and how you pick and choose what to work on in working yourself?
A great question. I think I'm in such a fortunate position that I work as a coach and I train other coaches. So I am so lucky to hear different strategies all the time. And sometimes my client will mention something and I go, oh my goodness, why have I not thought of that? And then I jump on that train and I try that for a while and I think, this is amazing. I've hacked my ADHD, and then something changes and my energy shifts and I need to try something new. I think I'm lucky that I work in a team where we're a whole neurodivergent team there. Everyone has some kind of neurodiversity there. And so we all lean on each other. We all work out, what works for each other. For me, I take notes with everything. My working memory is my least developed executive functioning skills. I take notes for everything. And I've just had to learn over the while. I'm a paper person. I'm not a digital person. So I generally don't like using a lot of technologies. I am working out what is working for me. But yeah, you have to pivot all the time.
I'd love to just a cheeky follow-up one there with you is, so many of my clients, when they're coming to me talking about working memory, and they're saying, oh, I just would love to write things down, but controlling the conversation to be able to be like, stop, I can't write and listen, it's write or listen. How do you kind of deal with that, and that kind of concept of like, oh, I'm a built-in people pleaser because I'm neurodiverse, like where do I go now?
It's such a good one, because I think like working memory is one of the more tricky ones to support. But, over the years, it's just wonderful to learn different strategies. I've just said that I'm a paper and pencil person, but I have found technology has been wonderful with that. So when I do my trainings, I actually lean a lot on AI. Our Zoom actually creates a meeting summary. So happy days, and anytime I work with clients, happy days, it creates a whole meeting summary. I'm jotting down keywords as I'm going, because maybe this is the therapist, the counselor in me, but I want to be with you in the session. So I'm rather capturing the keywords that I can loop back then and support you in that session. But I am always mentioning, I always say to my clients, in whatever, whether it's coaching or personal clients there, I'm always saying to them, I'm going to jot that down because I'm supporting my working memory. I advocate for this all the time because I want to normalize that this is just something, it's a strategy that I use and it works for me. But the AI it's amazing, amazing.
Nice. Katie, what about you with like managing all the different bits and pieces that are going on with working with me, the best boss ever, and your many other jobs that you've had in the past? Maybe we could talk about those.
So for me, one of the things with autism is black and white thinking. And this is something I'm really diving into a lot lately, both in my personal life and then in my business life. So I think I told you recently, I need rules. So it's this idea that when I am given a project or given something, I need a strict framework in order to know what is expected. Elsewise, my ADHD takes over and then I just run wild with something. So for me, one of the coping mechanisms that I really lean into is asking people for rules, or kind of cleaning up that black and white thinking. So an example is like the one I just said with you, but then also with my partner, we were talking about we want to have more dates in our like relationship and like, go out for cute cocktails. And I said, I am the kind of person who it will always sit in the gray, always sit in maybe we'll go do that this week. Maybe we'll go do that this week. And I asked him, I said, I need you to set a rule. I need us to put it, whether that's a date on the calendar, whether that's a weekly cadence, I need us to set a rule that every Thursday at 5:30, we have a date. So that can be pivoted into the working world as well by asking your boss for rules. Like with our newsletter, initially you were like, yeah, publish whenever. And I was like, no, I need a rule. I need a date. I need a firm, this is the thing. And then once I have that commitment, it's really hard. Yeah. And it's really hard for me to move away from it, but that's a different side of it. So for me, it's not necessarily about constantly having new strategies. My ADHD does ask for that. But when it comes to the autism piece, it's very much finding those rhythms and the patterns and the constant systems of like, this is the framework that I operate within. And that makes my just working through things so much easier, and then knowing to ask for them, which is always the hardest part, but because you feel stupid asking your boyfriend, hey, can we set a rule that we have a date once every Wednesday? It feels silly, but it's made a huge difference for me, because I blocked that off mentally. So that would probably be my little tip.
There's many things that I just really love about Katie, but I actually find her rigidity one of my favorite qualities, because I am so flexible. Whatever, I don't mind, I don't care. Yeah, we could do it that day or that day. But I feel like Katie and I are yin and yang, and found each other. And the perfect thing is that I'm so ADHD that I'm like, yeah, let's do this. But she can't make me do she will force me into, no, Natalie, you said this. I know, but no, you said this. So it's just a little life hack. If you are thinking, dear God, I sound ADHD, then can I recommend an autistic business partner? Because we found a world that works, and it's she's rigid, I'm flexible, and together it just makes sense. Timmy, what about
Natalie,
you? Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly just jump in on that, and just, it's so helpful to find someone else who actually plays to your if you've got a weakness and strength, just that yin and yang, yin and yang. It's so important. I found that with my boss as well. So she's got dyslexia, she's big picture thinking. I have ADHD and I'm detail. So she helps me with the big picture when I get stuck in the read, and we go to each other all the time. And this could be a friend, it could be a partner, it could be anyone. It's so nice just to be, to have that springboard of, okay, I'm getting stuck. What do I do? It's made such a difference.
I know. I say this to people all the time whenever I'm working with them. I'm like, I couldn't live without Katie's rigidity. It's it's everything to me. And I think I wanted to highlight that, because I think, I know Katie won't mind me saying this, that sometimes it makes her feel too much. And it's it's nowhere near too much for me. It's the exact thing I've always wanted in my life. I actually feel emotional thinking about how helpful it is to have someone to be no, you said last week we're doing this. And I'm like, all right then. I don't change colors on things for living in fear of making a change. We were talking to my other employee earlier, and I was like, make sure I change the color back, she'll kill me. Because we have a beautiful spreadsheet on what gets posted on what day, and if I mess with it, then there's hell to pay, and I know that, and I love it. So just this kind of concept of you're only too much for them, because Katie's not too much for me by any stretch of the imagination. Tumi, do you want to talk a little bit about how to navigate, that discussion of dyspraxia in the workplace, and that particular feeling of oh yeah, I don't it's not that buzzword that people know as well. So that must be an extra layer of difficulty.
Yeah. And for me, I think it's getting easier. The last time I've had to navigate that in the workplace was 6 years ago, when I didn't have the black dyspraxic. So I'm sure when when I get interviewed again in another workplace, they'll just Google me and they'll be like, oh. But the thing is, when I'd finished my master's and I was looking for work, it was very, very challenging, because I would openly just say in an interview, by the way, I have dyspraxia. And then I would say, oh, this means I struggle with attention to detail, typing things on time. I would just list in difficulties, and I just left the conversation there. But don't worry, I've done my undergrad and my master's. I'll be fine. I didn't get the job when I was doing that, and it got to a point where I said, actually, I don't have to disclose my neurodivergence if I didn't want to. And I decided to actually withhold that information until after I got the job acceptance offer. And then as I accepted them, as I got then I said, oh, by the way, I have dyspraxia and I'll need these accommodations. And that was a lot better strategy. But looking back, and the more I've gone into this journey of being a neurodivergent advocate, I made one fundamental mistake. And that is when I was talking about dyspraxia, I led with my challenges and finished with my challenges, and I didn't mention any of my strengths.
Yeah.
What I should have said was, I'm dyspraxic, and it means that I'm entrepreneur, I'm creative, I'm resilient, and I've done all these incredible things. But I do struggle with attention to detail, but with adjustments such as AI or just having some assistance in a team, and in my team, I need people that are detailed oriented and doing all of that. Showing that awareness is a bigger selling point than just saying I'm dyspraxic and I struggle with coordination. It's about owning the narrative, but also making realize that being neurodivergent doesn't mean we're just a list of challenges, but we're incredible people that add assets to the world. But in disclosing, I've had the whole, oh, I'm dyspraxic, and they're like, do you mean you're dyslexic? And it's like, no, I meant what I said. I meant dyslexic. So that's always interesting.
Yeah, I think whenever some of the neurodiversity traits that I feel like aren't as well known, I hide as something else. I'll make jokes about, and it's like it's easier to make jokes about the things that are like not as well known. So, really struggling with auditory processing, the chances I'm going to tell you I'm hard of hearing is pretty high, when the truth is I'm just struggling with auditory processing. When I bump into something, I'm not going to tell you I'm dyspraxic. I don't want to tell you my life story in that moment. I'm just gonna be like, oh, sorry, I'm such a klutz. But that is being self-deprecating and putting yourself down and leading with your challenges, like you said. And it's this kind of like fine line based on the circumstances and the situations of when do you say that it's this and when do you say, oh, it's, doesn't matter, and all of those, navigating that piece is so hard.
Yeah, I think there's no right or wrong. And it's definitely down to the individual, because it's interesting that you said about you being such a klutz. Dyspraxia used to be described as clumsy child syndrome. So there was a time in the world where people would say, I have clumsy child syndrome. How deprecating is that? Because it's like, and also it's also understanding that we don't have to explain ourselves to everyone. So for example, I'm married, been married for the past 2 years. My wife has come from Nigeria and she loves driving, right? So she's come with me doing her driving, learning to drive. And one of my friends said to me, why are you, I don't drive, by the way. They were like, look, you're supposed to be her husband. Why are you allowing your wife to learn to drive? Why aren't you driving? Number one, that was really offensive to me, because number one, it's none of their business. Number two, she says that the man has to be the one driving. But then number three, I had to disclose. It made me feel bad, because I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe that is something that I should do. But actually, it opened up an opportunity for me to say that actually I struggle with things like coordination and spatial awareness due to dyspraxia. So I thought right now it's better for our partnership, for my wife to drive, and that's just an example.
I think driving is a big area of shame for a lot of people who are neurodiverse, and it's like not one of those ones that got a lot of light shed on. So thank you for sharing. And I know I don't have my driving license, and it's because I'm neurodiverse. Like the idea of learning is super stressful. The idea of being able to park with dyspraxia just feels non-existent. And so I've like put it off and put it off and put it off for years. And people are like, you're 32, why do you not know how to drive? And you're like, doesn't matter, it's really expensive, not important. And yeah, like you said, not wanting to give everyone your life story. Jo, I'm going to come to you on dyslexia and kind of like the, strategies in the workplace and dealing with maybe some of the little known things. Obviously, you have your own business, so feel free to kind of talk about that. But if it's kind of feels more authentic, if there's anything that you've heard from clients as well, where they've said, oh, you know what, I'm really leaning into this, or I've come to you because of this challenge and, wanting to learn how to deal with it, feel free to jump.
Are you still wanting me to talk about constantly changing life situations, or is this a slightly different question?
I'm just going along as we go.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I'm getting excited about each question.
Just because I think going back to kind of tying up what everybody's kind of said on that, my view on that is I think you have to totally learn to love and own your neurodiversity, no matter what it is, right? Because when you own it and you know how it manifests itself in you, you've got the confidence to advocate for yourself when you want to advocate for yourself. But equally, if you don't want to disclose it at that time, you've got the confidence to actually say, I'm calling myself a klutz. I don't actually really think that, but I just can't be asked to tell you my whole life story. Like I think for me, really understanding how whatever neurodiversities you have got manifest themselves in you and impact you on a day-to-day is really important. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing, which I think ties in with what you've just said, is that neurodiversities, they change over time. They change depending on what is going on in your life. They change depending on who you are surrounded by. They are constantly evolving. Take it from a perimenopausal woman with 3 teenage children now. Like, you just think you've cracked something and you've got a strategy or a way around something, and something else comes along. Now, I wrote a post not long ago about how I would love to have my ducks lined up in a beautiful row. I have finally, at the age of 44, realised that is never going to happen. That doesn't make me a failure. But actually constantly trying to get my ducks in a row is setting myself up for success. Because actually, as we said on the phone today earlier, Natalie, we roll with a bit of chaos in our lives, and that's okay. But also, I'm not the sort of person, and I think most of you on this call will be with me, because I think it's a neurodivergent trait. We don't settle. We drive ourselves to be better. We're pretty determined. We push ourselves out of our comfort zone. So that's why our ducks are never going to be in a row, because literally we sort out understanding that strategy or putting that strategy in place, and we get them all lined up and we're like, right, okay, they're all lined up now. I think I could probably put something else in on the end. What else can I kind of push myself with? So then all of the ducks you had in a row go out of a row again as you kind of learn to tame that one and put that one on the end. And I think when we're talking about managing neurodiversity, there are generic strategies for sure, and tips and advice that we can give people. But it's going to be different for everybody, depending on what your profile looks like, depending on what your network of people around you are like. I am super lucky because I've been married for a very long time. But my husband is so calm. He is the polar opposite to me. So when I'm flapping here, there, and over the place, he is like really calm. And actually, if it wasn't for him, sticky situations at work at different times would have been even more sticky. But I think who you surround yourself with is key, because equally, if you're surrounded by people you trust or people that get you, again, you're going to feel more confident and more able to negotiate, navigate, ask for what you need. Whereas if you're in an environment where you're just terrified that actually, if I disclose that I've got that neurodiversity and ask for that accessibility arrangement, even though I know it's going to make me more efficient, you're going to be really anxious, which is going to cause you to be to be struggling and not accepting it. So sorry, I've gone off on a big tangent then. I probably spoke more than you, but I hope that gives you some helpful stuff.
No, I was really like, well, I think we were all nodding big time to the adding an extra thing at the end, particularly me, who was in a meeting with Katie last night. She was like, Natalie, we're never going to be happy. You have to accept we're always going to redo things and make things better. And I was like, I don't like it. Why is it so true? So when you said that, I was like, I feel extra called out.
Oh, you know, it's tricky. And then joking apart, when you've got children in the mix, I don't know if there are any parents on this call,
Sure.
but like that just throws another whole dynamic into, you know, managing a neurodiversity, because the flip side is the chances are at some point you're not going to be just managing your own neurodiversity, you're going to be managing your child's neurodiversity as well. And sometimes you clash, sometimes you do things differently. So it's just a constantly evolving journey. And that's where I think calls like this are really powerful. Because I have to say, I just came on last minute because you asked me to, but I felt quite emotional listening and quite kind of seen. It's powerful when you realise you're not the only one that is experiencing something or feeling something. So yeah, thanks for inviting me along.
Oh yeah, no, we had the joys of a neurodiverse audience and panelists. We had some fun and games on organizing everything. So thank you for the last minute call ups. I appreciate you all so much. So, and I just also wanted to pull out what you said about confidence and surrounding yourself with people who get it and are, you know, think you're, you know, nowhere near too much. Kind of the amount of nasty comments. The thing that I love to say to people is the only good study that I love to quote on neurodiversity is that by the age of 13, it is thought that people who have ADHD, and we don't have the other neurodiversities, but we know it'll be the same, people have received 20,000 additional criticisms. Can you imagine what that feels like to receive 20,000 additional criticisms by 13? I'm 32 and I can't even begin to imagine. And frankly, all 20,000 of them I probably given to myself. I'm so self-critical. So I think, you know, confidence and surrounding yourself with the right people is everything. And that's the powerful thing about being an adult, is that we have the opportunity to do those red flag checks to kind of decide who we're going to involve and let into our world, like Tumi was saying. I'm running over time, which is no great surprise for anyone that knows me well. So I'm going to ask the panel one last question, and I want to check in with Tumi on intersectionality, because it is a really important topic, and it is also Black History Month as well. So I want to make sure we do a kind of that as well. So if anyone needs to drop, then no worries, you can catch the recording. But we're going to just go with one last question. I'm looking desperately at the list I had when I was like, I'm going to pick that question, and now the list is just staring away at me. Yes, okay. I wanted to kind of talk to the panel about the diagnosis, like free for all, and you know, who's got the formal diagnoses for what, who just can't be bothered. What do you recommend? What do you say to people who don't have, you know, thousands and thousands to pummel on lots of different diagnoses? I think if we've got two people who do diagnoses on the panel, so they'll be able to provide a unique perspective. Katie and I, who are kind of like looking at the list of things we want diagnosed, going, do I want to spend all of that money? So, you know, some like interesting perspectives. Just to shortly offer mine, I think it's all about what you need it for. If you need it for something formal, something important, obviously then you need it, and it's got its worth weight in gold. If that diagnosis will make you be yourself, stand a little bit taller, take on advice that, you know, so many people are shouting about the neurodiversity, if it will give you the confidence to stand tall in your neurodiversity, it is worth every single penny. But if you're pretty sure, and, you know, ADHD has medication as well, so there's a complexity that is aside. If you're pretty sure and you don't feel like you need that assurance, then it's a question as to whether or not a screening feels right. So if you wanted my opinion, that's mine, but I'm going to go back down the top of the panel. So Casey, as in South African Casey, I'm gonna start with you.
Yeah, it's such an interesting one. So I used to do assessments. I don't do them anymore. But I think what you say is so valid. Like, what is it that you're hoping to get out of an assessment? And it could be like that you want to go the medication route. For me, it's always, what kind of support would you get after that? So like for me, I used to do assessments for school age kids, and they would get amazing accommodations. Like in South Africa, it's quite forward thinking. We get things like extra time. You can get a scribe, you can get a computer, you can get a separate room. Like there's a lot of stuff that can actually come from a diagnosis.
Basically, make them tell them about the process of diagnosis in South Africa as well, so that we can all advocate for what we should have in the UK, or where you get them all diagnosed in one place.
What do you mean in one place?
You were telling me in South Africa that you can get ADHD, autism, and
oh yeah, no, this blew my mind when I first discovered, in the UK you go for like a ADHD assessment, a dyslexia assessment, a ASD assessment. I used to do assessments. We call it a global assessment, where I'm in there, I'm listening to your whole life story, and it means I pick up, oh, you have ADHD. Oh, I think you actually have ASD there as well. You've got some sprinklings of dyslexia in here as well. Here's support that supports you for all of it. For me, it's wild that you come in and you go for a dyslexia assessment, then you sit on wait on a list, and then you go back for an ADHD assessment. You've lost so much time where you could have had a whole bunch of support there. So it's wild that happens, like that. So for me, just to jump back, close that loop there, I'm really bad at that, often jump like this. But just back to what you were saying there, Natalie, of the reason why you're going for that. For me, I was doing these assessments. People are coming there, they think that they have ADHD. And if you're coming there, you've got these questions, 99% you actually are meeting a lot of the criteria as well. For me, I do a lot of work then. Even if you went for an assessment or you didn't, here's some strategies that are going to work for you if you have a label or you don't. So like I'm very big about that. And that's a lot of the work that, that we do in our company there as well. But for me, it was such a weird one that I was sitting doing assessments and doing support, doing coaching then for especially university students. And I suddenly started doing this thing where I was like, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I do that too. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I hadn't clicked that, oh my gosh, Casey, you have ADHD as well. It was the weirdest thing. I'm working with it every single day. And there it comes out. Like I went for the assessment and the person was like, yeah, I called that one. And I was like, why? Why have I not? And again, this is, I think, even though I studied this, we study, and Joe, I mean, back me up, I know that you've done dyslexia assessments. We study this as like the 7-year-old boy, this is what your symptoms look like. It's wild, bouncy, hyperactive. It's the very kind of typical ADHD. There's not enough done, not enough out there on what it looks like in a woman, in a perimenopausal woman. The influence on hormones is not enough about that. So yeah, it's just wild that there's so much. We still need to go so many places with this, but yeah, I probably looped a whole bunch. I don't know if I quite got to your question.
So much. You're over delivering. Thank you. Katie, what about you? What do you think about the multiple diagnoses and kind of navigating that whole piece?
So I'm going to start with a story because I love a good story. So I was in university, and because I'm a little extra, I decided I wanted to take like a senior level course that was not required. I was like, I don't want to take chemistry. I want to take anatomy and physiology. So I got all the paperwork to get exempted into this class. I had to like write a thing about why I needed this class. I'm a dance major and a history major. Did not need this class. So I got into the class, and the professor, he was like, look, spelling counts, and the tests, like that's all we have is 4 tests. So I'm in here panicking because I'm like, I have to figure out how to spell mitochondria and fibia tibia. And I was like, there is no way I'm going to be able to like figure this out. So I went to the professor and I was like, hey, I have dyslexia. What can we do about that? And he was like, oh, well, do you have a diagnosis? And I said, well, I'm sure my parents could find it, but it's a private diagnosis from when I was like in the 1st grade. And he was like, does the school recognize it? And I was like, no, this is a public university and I was privately diagnosed, so they won't accept it. And he was like, oh, well, I can't do anything for you. So luckily my university had on-site testing for things like neurodiversities, ADHD, dyslexia, mainly learning disabilities. Terrible term. And so I went and I got tested to have exemptions made so that I could get more time on his tests and so that spelling wouldn't count, things like that. I took the test. The guy like finished up my thing and was like, okay, well, dyslexia didn't show up here, but ADHD did. And he was like, but honestly, it probably is dyslexia, but it just is, you've figured out how to overcome it. So it's not showing up that way on the test. So I walked away not thinking I had ADHD for years. I was in my friend's office, let's say 10 years. Well, no, not 10 years, probably 5 years later. And I was chatting with her and I was like, I think I have ADHD. I'm working like a corporate job at this point. And she was like, you think? And I was like, oh, maybe I do have ADHD. So that whole story to say, even if you get a test, I don't necessarily think that it means anything unless you believe what's on the test. Like that's the piece that I think is important, because you can get every panel in the world, but if you don't feel like you actually are suffering from ADHD, you probably aren't going to take the action needed to make the changes needed. And then the other piece I wanted to bring up is I don't think you need a diagnosis in the age of social media, because there's so many great people, creators, influencers out there who are really communicating what this looks like in the daily life. So I know Casey talked about ADHD earlier, but ADHD often looks really different in women. And there's actually two kinds, well, three kinds, but two primary kinds of ADHD. One is like the hyperactive little kid that we think of, but then there's also inattentive, which is the one that affects women a little bit more based on statistics. Autism is the same way. So I don't believe that you need to have like an actual diagnosis. If you identify with the symptoms and are taking steps to manage it, that I think is what's important. So yeah, that's my tangent and my two little spiels.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had so many people, and Tumi, I'm sure you'll talk about this in the intersectionality bit in a bit, of like so many particularly people in the Black community have got diagnosed and they just bin it because that's what the last thing that they want like to like have that diagnosis. And there's so many other communities that are the same, that just are like, I have the diagnosis, but I refuse to accept it. Like, so, even the diagnosis sometimes doesn't work truly as that rubber stamp to help you feel like secure enough to stand tall. What about you, Tumi, in terms of kind of getting those additional diagnoses? And do you have any like specific things on getting diagnosed with the dyspraxia and how to kind of start that process? I'm sorry to jump in that extra question for you. I'm a terror.
It's a difficult one. I can't, because I was diagnosed so early, so I don't know what life was like before my diagnosis. There's always been part of my existence. But I always say that a diagnosis is like a tool, right? It's not, and the thing about tools is it depends on who has the tool. So, for example, if you think about like a knife, it's a tool. You can use it to cook a delicious meal, but you could also use it to kill somebody. Another example is money. And I think a diagnosis is completely the same way. It can work wonders for one person, but if the diagnosis is going to be the root of stigma, or going to be used as the thing that you're going to use to limit yourself, then maybe it's not for you. Also, we need to talk about the fact that a diagnosis in itself is a privilege. It's inaccessible to so many people. We've talked about women, but also people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. I know for a fact I'm British-born Nigerian, so I was diagnosed in London at the age of 4. But if I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, that's probably not going to happen. I'm really glad to see what Casey said about having multiple diagnoses at the same time in South Africa. That's legendary. But now, in a sense, in South Africa, she has geographical privilege compared to the people living in the UK. So can you see that how, depending on where you're born in the world, where you've grown up, accesses to different services can mean that your neurodivergence can impact you completely differently. I would also say that because of other prejudice and intersectionalities and things like structural racism and bias, sometimes an official diagnosis can actually do wonders in the workplace to put context, because ethnic minorities are less likely to believe that they just they need adjustment because of the ADHD, and they're like, okay, your boss may say, so where's the proof? And you're like, I don't have proof, like I just know. So that might be more important for other communities. But with the diagnosis in itself, there's still a double whammy because, as you said, Natalie, even though you are diagnosed, people, certain cultures, certain faith will make people to doubt their medical diagnosis as well. So there's loads of nuances, loads of complexities, but I would always just, my main principle is that your diagnosis, like a label, is just a tool.
I think that's a really beautiful analogy. Thank you for sharing. Jo, let's talk about your opinion as a dyslexic assessor.
Yeah, I'm gonna go two routes. So first of all, I'm going to talk about myself. So I was late diagnosed 34. My reason for getting the assessment was because my mum basically didn't believe that I could be dyslexic because I had a degree. So I kind of went and got my diagnosis to kind of prove her wrong, but also because I genuinely, my self-esteem and my confidence at the time was so low, I just needed to understand how my brain worked. So for me personally, that dyslexia diagnosis was really important. We've had many discussions, Natalie. I'm pretty sure I'm ADHD. I'm managing it. I would actually quite like the medication, if I'm honest, because I do suffer quite significantly with anxiety. And the more I look at that pattern in the last few years, I think it's potentially ADHD burnout because I'm just not regulating myself very well, possibly. But I still haven't really decided because some days it feels more important than others, and I just can't prioritize the money right now. It's a 3.5-year waiting list, I think, where I am at the minute. And it kind of doesn't feel important. I'll probably do it one day, but at the moment it doesn't matter. I work for myself, we kind of get by. I think in terms of dyslexia assessment as an assessor, so I assess children right up to adults. I'm an independent assessor. I get a lot of hate because I'm told that assessments are expensive. Actually, it's really tricky. As you know, to run your own business, you have to do your own training, insurance. The assessment tools are so expensive.
The amount of work these guys put into the assessments as well. I have to say, I was one of the haters until I realized the extent of time and effort that goes into an assessment. It really is value for money.
It's not a 2-minute thing. There's the time to administer the assessment, to write up the report. You know, I do a feedback call with mine, but that's another conversation. I think when people come to me for an assessment, whether it is a parent for their child, whether it is an adult, and they say, how is an assessment going to help me? I throw back to them, you're asking the wrong question. Why do you want an assessment? Because I think so often people think it's going to give them the answers and they're going to almost be able to wield it like a weapon to places, you know, I'm dyslexic, so therefore you have to do X, Y, and Z. And actually, if that's your reason for getting an assessment, it's never going to work. You know, Toomey put so beautifully that it is a tool and it only has power if you choose to run with it. So often people think the diagnosis, that report, is going to be the end of the story. I'm sorry to say it's the beginning. Like, because actually you get it and then you have to get your head around it. You have to kind of grieve for all of the missed opportunities and all of the things that have happened in the past and all of the things that could have been. Like, it's a massive roller coaster of emotion. So I think it's not straightforward. You know, as Toomey said, I feel so sad. There are kids that desperately need it and whose parents genuinely can't afford it. There are other parents that will literally sacrifice everything to pay for an assessment. I actually assess quite a big range of of people. Actually, it's quite interesting. And I've got payment plans so people can do it over a period of time. But I think it is an interesting one, diagnosis, because it only has power if you believe it has power, and it isn't necessary. And I think it is necessary, because people are still not accepting or understanding of it. Whereas if people, like Casey said, with social media these days, if you could go into a workplace and you could say, I believe I've got a neurodiverse brain, I haven't got a formal diagnosis, but I think I'm dyslexic, I think I'm ADHD, I know that really works for me and really doesn't work with me. Can you help me work out how that looks in the workplace? If workplaces were like that, you wouldn't need a diagnosis. But sadly, workplaces are not like that. So you end up having to have a diagnosis in order to get the reasonable adjustments that you should be given anyway without the diagnosis, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's my, sorry, I know we're running over time. I could say a lot more, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, Jo, I think that was really powerful. And just to kind of like save on a little bit of time, I wanted to talk a little bit about like intersectionality when it comes to neurodiversity. And there's so much to discuss in terms of gender and like socioeconomic background and all of these different things. But I'd love to just specifically touch on race because I was working on it's getting released in November now, but I was working on a project on this to kind of shine a little bit of a spotlight. And I think I'd love a little bit of your perspective to me on how do we have that intersectional approach to neurodiversity, and what are some of the things that you feel like you want to shed a light on for the people who are interested in that element of the conversation when it comes to race and neurodiversity.
How long do you have?
Yeah. About 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for raising that. I think, number one, the same way people that have dyslexia or who are neurodivergent are not a monolith, Black people or people of color are not a monolith as well. So we exist, different genders, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different educational statuses, different religions, etc. But I think one of the things is that in terms of, if I was going to compare in terms of awareness or stigma, we're still very much further behind sometimes. And so what happens is, for someone who is Black and neurodivergent, for example, I like to call it like a bi-directional stigma going on. So a stigma within the community and then a stigma outside the community. So for example, when I was diagnosed with dyspraxia, my mom was in disbelief for years. You understand? Someone may say, why don't we just take you to a pastor or imam to pray that neurodivergence away? All those things, you know, or if you're ADHD and you have they will say, do you really need that medication? I've heard some people say that maybe they're just giving you a label to limit you, so associating the label with either having a misconception that that label may be a form of racism and stuff like that. So there's so many things going on and to unpack. We talk about neurodivergence and anxiety and emotional regulation. Think about, you know, the riots that we had a few months ago, or just other forms of injustices across the world. These things really, really negatively affect not just Black people, but especially Black neurodivergent people as well. There's so many things I could talk about in terms of the fact that the discrepancies that we have in the criminal justice system. So we know that if you're neurodivergent, you're more likely to be in prisons. But guess what? As a Black person, you're more likely to be stopped and searched, and you're also more likely to be in prison. But no one has done the research to say, okay, so to what extent do those multiple forms of marginalizations compound? Well, one would assume that that means there might be a higher proportion of Black neurodivergent people in prisons. And that's just, and we could use the same kind of analysis in education, with mental health, with employment. And so I could go on. So another example is the fact that if you're neurodivergent, you're more likely to be excluded from school. And we know that people from the ethnic minorities are also likely to be limited. But again, when we think about this kind of information data, we only think about it in one social category. So we look at, okay, what is the exclusion when it comes to race? What does it look like when it comes to disability? But actually, one thing that is like, if we're going to talk about intersectionality, we need to have an intersectional approach when it comes to research, the type of data we're gathering, and it needs to influence the policies and the systems that we want to change in our world. I will leave it there.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. I think the way that I always try and help people understand what's going on when it comes to dyslexia, and I think intersectionality plays into this, is it's your backpack. Like, you've got a backpack that you're carrying around, and maybe your backpack has, you know, difficulties, like Joe was saying, with processing reading, or maybe it's got what Katie was talking, your backpack has maybe got what Katie was talking about, of like that anxiety, or maybe it's like Casey was saying, with that burnout and that energy management challenges. But it also has confidence challenges because maybe you were late diagnosed, or maybe you just constantly felt like you never achieved your potential. You know, whatever it is, these things that you're carrying around in your backpack, when it comes to neurodiversity, it's never just the challenge itself, it's all the other things. And it's, you know, if you're trying, I remember being like a young woman in the workplace when neurodiversity was way less like socially acceptable. Going as a woman to talk to about someone about neurodiversity felt absolutely terrifying. And that brick that you're adding to the backpack of race as well, or so lower socioeconomic status, is really challenging. And that for me is the point around intersectionality. And I'm gonna kind of do a shout out on you all soon, but Toomey has some exciting things in the project, so make sure you check him out if that research piece on intersectionality feels important. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And if anyone wants to dive more into this topic, there's lots of amazing creators talking about this, and we have a podcast episode coming out in November to talk about this particularly as well. So there's a few more resources coming down the track on this as well. Tried to get it out for Dyslexia Awareness Month and Black History Month, but organizing this really took over our entire life. So yeah, bear with us on that one. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. Thank you everyone for staying so much later than we've managed to overrun. And thank you for the amazing panel. I'm going to just quickly, Casey is Connections in Mind. You can find her there. Katie is on the newsletter and everything Dyslexia and Adults. Really, she's the brainchild of so much. So you can find her with me. Toomey is the Black Dyspraxic. And then Joe, you're like Joe Reese around the world, pretty much everywhere. Is that right? I think you're on mute, my love. But Joe is biggest on TikTok. She's
yeah, at Dyslexic Life with Joe Reese.
Yes. Okay, amazing. Thank you everyone for joining. And then just very quickly, the rest of the week, if you got excited about burnout, if you got excited about working memory challenges, we've got those coming. But Katie, what have we got next week?
So for the remainder of this week, this will be posted in the next 24 to 48 hours if you want to go watch the replay. We also have our community question/challenge coming out a little bit later this week, and we've got a surprise resource coming. It will be here soon. And then in addition to that, we will be pivoting at the start of next week into a working memory week. So this is going to be a lot about what Casey talked about, of these executive functions in your little noggin. And we will be talking to some of our community members and our Hive community members and Natalie's one-on-one coaching clients. And we're going to be diving into how real people, not like people who work in the industry, not Richard Branson level people, how real people who have normal everyday jobs are managing their working memory challenges. And we've got a whole variety of people who work in different industries come into chat. So it's going to be a really fun panel. And then we'll have some resources and other stuff dropping next week, all focused on working memory.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.